Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we gotta talk about the case of Marcellus Williams, a man who was convicted of a 1998 murder who was recently put to death in the state of Missouri. However, the facts of the case aren't all that interesting because he is 100% guilty, and I will prove that to you throughout the course of this video. What's interesting is that this was yet another innocence fraud case, and a bunch of different various media figures decided to go out of their way to lie about this case, only present arguments from the defense, only present arguments from the Innocence Project, despite the fact that this case is rock solid. So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about this. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So I first stumbled across this case actually while watching the Philip DeFranco show, where Philip DeFranco decided that he was going to go out of his way to give you misleading defense talking points, never give you the actual evidence against Marcellus Williams, all while playing up the racial angle because, of course, when a black man murders a white woman, obviously this is indicative of evil white racism. So we're going to go into this clip as presented by Philip DeFranco, and I'm going to give you all the different various pieces of evidence that refute, dispute, and absolutely destroy the arguments put forward by him, and of course share with you the actual evidence that was presented at trial that proves overwhelmingly that Marcellus Williams was in fact guilty of this murder.
And then we gotta talk about how a man's life is in the hands of the Missouri State Supreme Court right now, because they are currently deciding whether or not a man who many believe is innocent should be executed tomorrow. So this man's name is Marcellus Williams, and he's 55 years old, with him having now spent more than 2 decades in prison after being convicted for murdering a woman by the name of Felicia Gale. Because in 1998, someone broke into her home in the suburbs of St. Louis and stabbed her to death with a knife taken from her kitchen. But Williams, he has always said it was not him.
So I just want to point out something that should be obvious to everybody out there in the audience. This idea that somebody saying that they didn't do it or maintaining their innocence is somehow evidence of the fact that they are innocent is ridiculous and absurd in every possible way. The guy's guilty. There would be no case if he admitted and acknowledged his guilt, but since he didn't do that, since he won't do that, it is presented to us as the lead-off talking point from a guy like Philip DeFranco, who is pulling all of his information from the Innocence Project. But one of the things that really pisses me off is that DeFranco says that the evidence isn't convincing at all. Why would they even execute this guy? Because there's no evidence, as told to you by Philip DeFranco, who's getting all his talking points from the Innocence Project.
And despite his conviction and the death sentence that came with it, the evidence that he's guilty, I mean, it is far from convincing to say the least. And so with that, we've seen his execution actually put off twice already. Right, first in 2015 and then in 2017 when then Governor Eric Greitens appointed a board of inquiry to look into whether Williams deserved clemency. But notably, Greitens then resigned not long after that in the midst of scandals involving allegations of sexual misconduct and blackmail. And when the current governor, Mike Parson, took office, he dissolved the board and revoked Williams' stay of execution. And then, I mean, this year, it's just been even more of a roller coaster, right? This last January, Wesley Bell, who's the prosecuting attorney for St. Louis County, he filed a 63-page motion saying that Williams was likely innocent. For one, he argued that the 2 main witnesses against Williams, quote, were known liars beyond being incentivized by the reward money.
So Philip DeFranco just threw a lot of different various things at you, and I'd like to address them point by point by point. So first of all, the witnesses. So what ended up happening in this particular case, again, according to the facts and evidence of the case, is as follows. On August 11th in 1998, Williams drove his grandfather's Buick to a bus stop and caught a bus to University City. Once there, he began looking for a house to break into. Williams came across the home of Felicia Gale. He knocked on the front door and no one answered. Williams then knocked out a window pane near the door, reached in and unlocked the door, and entered Gale's home. He went to the second floor and heard water running in the shower. It was Gale. Williams went back downstairs, rummaged through the kitchen, found a large butcher knife, and waited. Gale left the shower and called out, asking if anyone is there. She came downstairs. Williams attacked her, stabbing Gale 43 times, inflicting 7 fatal stab wounds. After that, Williams went to an upstairs bathroom and washed off. He took a jacket and put it on to conceal the blood that was all over his shirt. Before leaving, Williams placed Gale's purse and her husband's laptop computer and the black carrying case that the laptop goes in his backpack. The purse contained, among other things, a St. Louis Post-Dispatch ruler and a calculator. Williams left out the front door and caught the bus back to his Buick. After returning to the car, he picked up his girlfriend, Laura Asaro. Asaro noticed that despite the summer heat, Williams was wearing a jacket. He then removed the jacket, and Asaro noticed that Williams' shirt was bloody and he had scratches on his neck. Williams claims he had been in a fight. Later in the day, Williams put the bloody clothes in his backpack and threw them in the sewer drain, claiming he no longer wanted them. Asaro also saw a laptop computer in the car. A day or two after the murder, Williams sold the laptop to Glenn Roberts. Next day, Asaro went to retrieve some clothes from the car. Williams did not want her to look in the trunk and try to push her away, but before he could, Asaro snatched a purse from the trunk. She looked inside and found Gail's Missouri State identification card and a black coin purse. Asaro demanded that Williams explain why he had her purse, because she suspected that he was having an affair. Williams then confessed that the purse belonged to a woman that he killed. He explained in detail how he went into the kitchen, found a butcher knife, and waited for the woman to get out of the shower. He further explained that when the woman came downstairs, he stabbed her in the arm and then put his hand over her mouth and stabbed her in the neck, twisting the knife as he went. After relaying the details of the murder, Williams grabbed Asaro by the throat and threatened to kill her, her children, and her mother if he told anyone. Now, this is the information that we ultimately ended up getting from Asaro, the murderer's girlfriend, and unsurprisingly, Philip DeFranco never mentions the third witness, the absolutely crucial one, that says that he purchased the laptop from Williams, and by the way, Williams doesn't even deny that he sold the laptop. He claims that the laptop came from his girlfriend, which is absurd, ridiculous, and insane in every possible way. On top of that, the details about the stab wound in the arm and the knife being left in the neck that came from Asaro were not released publicly. So this was information that confirmed that this was legitimate knowledge of the case. And again, we had all these other different various bits of property that are going to come into play later.
He argued that the two main witnesses against Williams, quote, were known liars beyond being incentivized by the reward money.
On top of that, he repeats this lie that comes from Wesley Bell, who, by the way, was elected in the wake of the Michael Brown incident. He was somebody who classifies himself as a reformer, is anti-death penalty, and constantly pretends that guilty black people are innocent due to evil white racism. But the fact of the matter is, this guy is in fact guilty, and the claim that the girlfriend asked for any of the reward money is completely false. Witness that wanted and received the reward money was actually a cellmate of Williams, who was arrested later that month in August of 1998 on unrelated charges, who also said that Williams bragged about the murder after they watched a news blurb about it on television, and he also was able to provide crucial details to the police. But of course, because this guy's a criminal, because this guy lacks all morality, he didn't want to testify, he didn't want to come forward unless he received the reward money. So while that is true about the reward money being a motivating factor for one of the witnesses, it is an absolute objective lie that it is a motivating factor for both witnesses. Again, the girlfriend who has this crucial information never asked for any of the reward money from the family.
He argued that the two main witnesses against Williams, quote, were known liars beyond being incentivized by the reward money.
Now, you could say that the cellmate of Marcellus Williams can't be trusted because he's a criminal just like Marcellus Williams, and he's clearly and obviously motivated by getting the reward money. You can make that argument, and you can even go into conspiracy theory mode and say, you know what, those crucial details that were withheld from the public that he was able to present to the police, you don't buy that either because the police probably fed him those things because they were just trying to frame an innocent angel black person with 14 felony convictions. But even if you were to do that, buy into both of those narratives, go into that level of denial, what you can't get around, what you can't avoid, is the fact that this is the guy who pointed the finger first at Marcellus Williams, and coincidentally, even though he would have no way of knowing this because he just made it up, Marcellus Williams sold the laptop of the victim's husband 1 to 2 days after the murder. Can't really get around that. Now, we're going to return back to the evidence of the case in a moment, but I do want to go into the racism angle because, of course, when a black man murders a white woman in cold blood in savage fashion, for some reason, this is indicative of evil white racism, and Philip DeFranco plays into this false narrative, which is ridiculous in every way.
And then he claimed that the original prosecution improperly removed qualified jurors for racial reasons.
So let me explain this to you guys out there in the audience in case you might be confused. So when you're going to trial, what ultimately ends up happening during the jury selection process is that you can disqualify jurors with cause, and you also, for a limited number of jurors, can disqualify them without cause. So in this particular case, we actually had 6 potential black jurors that were disqualified from this case, among many jurors that were disqualified by both sides, by the way, using the exemption where you don't have to give an explanation for that. Years later, one of the prosecutors on this case said that one of the 6 prospective black jurors that was disqualified, again, in an instance where he didn't have to provide any justification for said disqualification, was disqualified because he thought that that juror looked like he could be related to the defendant.
And there, notably, that is something that the original prosecutor has actually commented on, with him saying, no, I didn't remove one of the jurors because he was black, but rather because he and Williams, quote, looked like they were brothers, which to me sounds like in a roundabout way of saying the exact same thing.
Well, DeFranco says that's just a complicated way of saying the same thing. The fact of the matter is, it's absolutely not a complicated way of saying the same thing, because that was one specific black juror that happened, according to the estimation of the prosecutor, to look too much like the defendant, and maybe he was worried about the fact that if they looked related, they might actually have some sympathy for the defendant and thus mess up the case. But again, it is totally protected for you to be able to disqualify X amount of jurors without cause when you're going into a trial, and this power extends not only to the prosecution, but to the defense. So for Philip DeFranco to make the claim that the prosecutor, when, by the way, he didn't have to give any justification for disqualification, admitted years later that one of the 6 disqualified prospective black jurors looked like the defendant, and that is the reason why he disqualified them, and change that to, oh, that's the same thing as disqualifying him for being black, is absurd in every possible way. Obviously, this is a distortion, but again, DeFranco is reading directly from the Innocence Project, directly from defunct and debunked defense propaganda, and that's what you can expect when they have no case for innocence.
But regardless, right, the big argument made by Bell has to do with the hard evidence, or rather, the lack of it. You see, he highlighted the fact that the original crime scene was, quote, rife with physical evidence, including bloody shoe prints, fingerprints, and hairs. But saying, despite that, quote, none of this physical evidence tied Mr. Williams to Miss Gale's murder. And to that point, just last month, a new analysis actually showed that Williams' DNA wasn't on the murder weapon.
So because the Innocence Project lies and says that there is no physical evidence relating Marcus Williams to this case, DeFranco just presents that as fact, and then he tries to trick you with the DNA fallacy, where he says, guess what? They tested the knife used to kill Gale for DNA, and they discovered that Marcus Williams' DNA was not on that knife, which of course they discovered that his DNA was not on that knife for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, Marcus Williams was wearing gloves. This is established at trial, so the idea that he would leave touch DNA on the knife doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever. Secondly, this crime was committed in 1998, which means that items were not preserved for touch DNA going back to 1998, and in fact, unless you go out of your way to preserve it, touch DNA degrades in a matter of weeks to months depending on the condition. So to be clear, the absence of Williams' DNA on the knife in no way, shape, or form exonerates him. However, they did detect 2 DNA profiles on the knife, but that also turned out to be completely misleading.
And so then, with that, prosecutors cut a deal with Williams to avoid execution. Though notably there, he still would have been resentenced to life without parole under the new agreement. But in any case, it all fell apart like that, right? Because what I didn't mention is that while Williams' DNA wasn't on the knife, someone else's was. 2 people's actually, with them finding the DNA of an investigator and a prosecutor who participated in the original trial. And so basically, they determined that the evidence had clearly clearly been mishandled. With that, then apparently meaning that it could no longer be used to exonerate Williams. With in fact a judge striking down the deal just a couple of weeks ago, with him saying the new analysis, quote, unraveled Mr. Williams' claim of innocence.
So remember what I said earlier about how touch DNA was not something that they were looking for back in the day? Well, it turns out the fact that they weren't trying to preserve these for technology that they didn't know to exist also led to the prosecutor and one of the detectives on the case handling the murder weapon. So the two DNA profiles that were supposedly of the real killer, wink wink, were actually of the prosecutor and the detective. And when this was discovered, the plea deal that they offered Marcus Williams, based on the fact that they found these alternate DNA samples, was withdrawn because obviously this was only proof of the fact that the prosecutor and, of course, the detective at some point in time during the trial handled the murder weapon, which we all knew already, so it was their DNA that was on that weapon. So now that I've completely obliterated this DNA talking point, because this is not a DNA case, Williams was not convicted on DNA, and again, the DNA that they were looking for was not something that they were to preserve back in the day before they knew touch DNA actually existed, let's talk about the physical evidence that does tie him to the crime. So like I said, after Williams is arrested in 1998 on unrelated charges, he is incarcerated at the St. Louis City Workhouse. From April to June 1999, Williams shared a room with Cole, and this is when Williams told Cole about Gale's murder. Now, after Cole was released from jail in June of 1999, he went to University City Police and told them about Williams' involvement in Gale's murder, and he reported details that had not previously been reported. In November of 1999, University City Police approached Asaro to speak with her about the murder, and Asaro told the police that Williams admitted to her that he had killed Gale. The next day, the police searched the Buick and found a post-dispatch ruler and calculator belonging to Gale. Police also recovered the laptop computer from Glenn Roberts, and this was the same laptop that was stolen from Gale's residence. So let's give you a quick recap of where we're at. Felicia Gale is a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. As a reporter working for a newspaper, she has certain items on her that are designated and labeled as Post-Dispatch items. Somebody, aka Marcellus Williams, breaks into her home, stabs her 43 times, including stabbing her in the neck. These details aren't released to the public, and two individuals are able to provide details to the police that they withheld from the public, like where she was stabbed, a year later when the police are investigating the crime after they get the tip. On top of that, we have a third witness who purchased, again, a day after the murder, the laptop from Marcellus Williams, and they were able to recover that laptop and determine that it was in fact the one stolen from her home that belonged to her husband. On top of that, Gale's purse, which was stolen from the scene and reported stolen at the time as a part of this burglary, contained a great number of items, two of which, being the calculator and the ruler, the items that didn't have all that much value, were found in the trunk of the car. Just as Asaro said, the purse was kept in the trunk of the car when the police searched it a year later.
But regardless, right, the big argument made by Bell has to do with the hard evidence, or rather, the lack of it.
So when Philip DeFranco says there's no physical evidence tying him to this crime, that is an absolute lie in the tallest order. We have property that was taken from the home that was undeniably in the possession of Marcellus Williams, one of which was a laptop that was sold, that, by the way, Williams acknowledges that he did in fact sell. And of course, we have other miscellaneous items that are found in the trunk. You combine that evidence with 3 witness testimonies and of course, the criminal history of this man, Marcellus Williams, and you realize that this case is pretty rock solid. Now, what do I mean by relevant criminal history? Well, Marcellus Williams has 14 felony convictions that are all crimes related to what he actually ended up doing. So it is a pattern of behavior for this individual. Let's go through them really quickly. So we have 2 felonies for robbery, armed criminal action, 2 felonies for assault, 4 felonies for burglary, stealing, which are 3 felonies, and theft of a motor vehicle and unlawful use of a weapon. Again, all of these are consistent with the attack on Gale. So while DeFranco just reads off the defense propaganda points as promulgated by the Innocence Project, we actually have, never mentioned by him, a relevant criminal history. You have a guy who has committed burglary after burglary, who has used weapons in the commission of those burglaries, who has assaulted people during the commissions of those thefts, and that's not mentioned at all whatsoever. We have the property from Gale that was sold by Marcellus Williams the day after the murder to somebody that was recovered, and additional property that was found in the trunk of the vehicle used by Marcellus Williams. We also have eyewitness testimony, and despite claims by Wesley Bell and the Innocence Project, the money motivation made him lie argument completely falls apart when you acknowledge the reality that he would have had to have made something up about somebody that coincidentally he shared a cell with, that also just happened to, for a totally innocent reason, come into contact with property from the crime scene that was stolen during the murder in a totally unrelated way. There's no explanation for that. He doesn't know the girlfriend, so attempts to try to frame her for the murder aren't going to make any sense because Williams says that the laptop actually belonged to his girlfriend. That's his weasel tactic. It all falls apart when you realize how aligned this case is. So yeah, you can call him money motivated, say he was making this up in order to just get that sweet $10,000 that, by the way, he was only eligible for if Marcellus Williams was convicted. But what you can't change is that he just randomly said that his cellmate admitted to this crime, and his cellmate had pieces of the victim's property in the vehicle that he was driving, and had another additional eyewitness say that he purchased the victim's husband's laptop that was stolen at the time of the crime from him in the 1 to 2 days after the murder. What a wild coincidence that that story made up by that totally unreliable prisoner was verified by corroborating evidence. On top of that, there were additional witnesses from his time in incarceration that were not used by the prosecution that also said that Williams bragged about this particular homicide. Those were turned over to the defense, and the defense decided to never bring those individuals forward. So they had additional evidence that they did not bring into this particular case because they weren't sure if those additional witnesses might have heard something secondhand, even though they were reporting firsthand knowledge. They only went with the cellmate that had the details that were not released to the public because he had the details that were not released to the public. So the police did a good job in this particular case. Look, this is not a hard case. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to understand. And the reason why every single court that looked at this case reaffirmed the guilt, the reason why the jury of his peers convicted him, was because Marcellus Williams is 100% guilty. But I do want to point out one additional thing, which is the reason why the Innocence Fraud movement often plays this almost all-white jury or all-white jury card. And by the way, in this particular case, the jury was not all-white. They did have a black member of the jury, so the idea that the prosecutor was just tossing every black person was just made up.
All that may be why Williams' lawyers have actually stopped emphasizing claims that he's innocent, at least for now. Instead, they're trying to get the case thrown out on the grounds that the original prosecution fucked things up by wrongly removing prospective jurors that were black and by the mishandling of the night.
But the reason they do this, to be clear, is in the hopes that a black jury will do the wrong thing and vote somebody they know is guilty to be not guilty due to other grievances that they have against the criminal justice system or they have against white people. And again, I'm not making this up. The Innocence Project is founded by Barry Schneck. He is somebody who was on the dream team for O.J. Simpson's defense counsel. And in that particular case, juror after juror have come forward to say that they know he was guilty, but they wanted revenge for Rodney King. And of course, they didn't like a white woman dating a famous black person, let alone marrying him. So they found O.J. Simpson not guilty for racial revenge. And again, don't take it from me. It's on tape.
One of the jurors, I believe it was juror number 6, a male black, stood in the jury box and raised his fist like this.
What?
This was a guy who presented as the most mild-mannered. And then we find out, yeah, he was a member of the Black Panthers years ago.
Do you think that they're members of the jury that voted to acquit OJ because of Rodney King?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
How many of you think felt that way?
Oh, probably 90% of us.
90%? Did you feel that way?
Yes.
That was payback.
Uh-huh.
You think that's right?
So I just want you to understand that while these people make the case that all white jury or almost all white jury is somehow akin to evil white racism, what they're actually saying is, hey, let's load up the jury with blacks so that way a black murderer, especially of a white person, especially of a white woman, might be able to catch a break because they have no evidence at all whatsoever of racism. They brought the prosecutor in to explain why he struck 6 prospective black jurors. The closest thing they have to evil white racism is he said one of those 6 prospective black jurors looked potentially related to the defendant. That's why he struck them. However, it is not a violation of procedure at all whatsoever to use your ability to strike jurors for any reason during the jury selection process. The fact that they even needed a reason from him or got a reason out of him is just something that they want to drop on you to add fuel to the fire, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being worried about a prospective juror being too closely related. Just think about it like this. What if there were a white woman in and around the same age as Felicia Gale that was going to be on the jury, and the defense team said, you know what, we're going to strike this person using our free strikes that we can use as we are allowed to in this particular court system. And then later on, people said, oh, well, that's unfair because the defense attorney said they struck that person because they were worried they might overconnect with the victim. Nobody would be complaining about that. Everybody would understand that you're trying to get as unbiased a jury as possible. And again, the whole reason you have those strikes without explanation is for particular instances like this, where you just got a feeling about somebody or something and you want them struck from the jury. On top of that, there's a lot of people who are widely reporting that the family didn't want Marcellus Williams executed. And while it is true that some members of the family have said that they're against the death penalty, no members of the family have been produced to say that Marcellus Williams is innocent because they know the facts of the case. Again, a career burglarer during the course of a burglary kills a woman. He ends up with multiple pieces of her property. Multiple witnesses come forward saying that he admitted to this murder. They actually provide details that were not released to the public. Somebody says that he purchased a laptop that belonged to the murder victim's husband that was stolen from the home from Williams. Williams admits that he sold that laptop to that person, and additional property from her purse is found in the vehicle that was allegedly used. Rock solid case, definitely 100% fair for the conviction. Whether you agree with the death penalty or not is on you, but the idea that there is any doubt is absurd in every possible way, and Philip DeFranco should be ashamed of himself for platforming only the defense talking points, only the debunked defense talking points during the course of his video. Pathetic and shameful. Marcellus Williams is a murderer. Whether you think he should be executed or not should not lead you to lie about his innocence versus guilt. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Marcellus Williams being 100% guilty. Till next time.